These are the books that I read in 2023. And these are all the books I read in 2024. Okay, so those weren't all the books I read in 2024, but I will get into that in just a little bit. In total, I read 76 books last year, which is quite a big jump from the 3 that I read in the previous 2 years. There are a lot of reasons why I was able to do this, but I figured that I would sit here and share some of the things that helped me, and hopefully, you know, that can help you with your reading goals and your reading journey too. For context, I know some people who read like hundreds of books a year, like that's their full-time job. That's not the case for me. I work full-time, I work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I do work from home, so I don't have a commute, but I do have, you know, a pretty normal life otherwise. I also don't have any kind of like caring responsibilities or anything like that, so I do have a little bit more free time than people who might have things like that, whether it's parents, kids, whatever. So let's get into it. Number 1, set yourself a goal. I have always found that if I have a goal that is measurable, actually attainable, it's realistic, then I will work hard to achieve that goal. And when I'm talking about goals, I'm not just talking about like numerical goals of I want to reach 100 books, 50 books, whatever. But of course, if that's what you want, there's nothing wrong with that. When you're sitting down to actually think about what you want to do, don't just have your goal be that you want to read more, because what does that mean? Is it reading 1 more book than the year before? Is it reading for more days out of the year than the year before? Is it just reading more pages? Like, it's if it's vague, it becomes very difficult for you to actually go, oh yes, I've done this, or I'm working towards it, or whatever. Instead, what you should do is think about what it is that you actually want to do with your reading. Do you want to read, you know, numerically more books than the year before, in which case give yourself a number? But there are tons of other kind of ways to kind of have a reading goal that don't just focus on that. You know, do you want to read more non-fiction? Do you want to explore more genres? Do you want to start reading books that really challenge you? Or do you want to finish series that you've already started? Take what you want to achieve and make a goal that is clearly defined, measurable, and actually realistic. If you read 2 books a year, don't just suddenly say I'm going to read 2,000. If you're not sure where to start, having like a basic numerical goal is absolutely fine. It's I think a very good way to start off. When I started my reading journey last year, I knew I wanted to read at least 1 book a month, so my goal was 12. When I realised that I was very much going to smash that, I changed my goal to 58, just because I saw kind of how many books I was going through, and that seemed like a realistic goal at the time. I'd smashed that one as well, so now it's really easy to kind of go, oh well, I read 76 books last year, so now I can read 100. I know that reading that many books took quite a lot of effort for me, so I'm not expecting to read that many books this year. It could very well happen again, but that's not my goal and that's not what I'm aiming for. This year, my goal is 30, because mostly I want to focus on reading a little bit more intentionally, reading books I'm actually looking forward to and I want to read, and not just the actual number of books. But I do have some goals for kind of reading specific books, as well as reading more classics and non-fiction, and a few genres that I don't really typically kind of branch into that much. Number 2, find what interests you. When you start reading, it's really easy to just see what is popular, what everyone is talking about, just pick those up and read them without really knowing what it is that you like and dislike when it comes to reading. So my tip, forget what is popular for a second and think about some of the books that you've read in the past that you've absolutely adored. Ask yourself, what is it about those books that you really liked? Do you enjoy stories about families or books that are set in a very specific historical setting? Do you like a certain kind of writing, or do you prefer, certain types of characters to be up at the forefront? And it's totally fine if you haven't read a lot of books or you're really just not sure where to start with this, because you can also look at what you like about movies and in TV shows and things like that. Do you enjoy historical dramas? Is Downton Abbey your favourite TV show? In which case, maybe look at more historical fiction. Or sci-fi, are you someone who has loved Dune? In which case you should probably just read Dune. But you should also look at some of the other kind of more classic sci-fi and more recent sci-fi. Do you love watching fantasy? Or do you prefer something a little bit more contemporary? Find the general kind of themes and trends of the media that you enjoy, and then find books that match those. I personally love stories that have really good representation of kind of marginalised characters, especially characters of colour. I love romance, but most of the romance I read has at least one character of colour, and if it doesn't, then it has a kind of queer character. I really enjoy queer stories. I really enjoy stories about women, particularly kind of women being strong, women, fighting back against what is expected of them. So when I started reading, I focused on those aspects, and I found some books that I really, really enjoy. So one example is Girl, Woman, Other. I got this as a gift a few years ago, and it's kind of just been sat on my shelf for a while. But this is almost the best way to describe it is it's almost like a collection of short stories about all these different people who are kind of all interconnected, but it mostly focuses on the stories of Black women. It explores a lot of different countries, a lot of different time periods, and this is exactly this is me in a book, basically. And yeah, since then I'm on a mission to read everything that Bernardine Evaristo has written, including I've got a book right there, The Emperor's Babe, which I read last year and I loved as well. And when it comes to romance, my favourite romance series that I read last year would have to be The Brown Sisters by Talia Hibbert. Each of these follows one of the sisters in this family, and it's just a traditional kind of sappy romance, but with these amazing strong Black women as our female leads. And there's so much good representation. There's disability representation, bisexuality, anxiety, autism, and it really just kind of helped me fall in love with reading these, because I felt very connected to the characters. It didn't feel like there was a disconnect of, well, I have nothing in common with these people. So yeah. One thing that I did learn though, and I think is worth noting, is that genres are massive. Two different people saying that they love fantasy could be extremely different readers with basically no crossover. One could love political drama fantasy, and the other could be just a big fan of cozy, witchy, low stakes fantasy. So don't be surprised if you say, oh, I'm really into sci-fi. People recommend books and they're just not vibing with you. It's totally fine, and it's all just a part of learning about what you like, and learning about other people's tastes as well. Number 3, libraries are your friend. This is very important. You do not need to own every book that you read. I have seen so many booktubers, booktalkers, bookstagrammers that have these massive shelves with hundreds of books, sometimes even thousands, and they are constantly buying to replenish. That is a lot of money. You do not need to do this. So again, not only is it a lot of money if you read a lot, but you're probably going to end up with a lot of books on your shelf that you just don't like. Going to the library gives you an opportunity to try out new books, especially when you're still in that period where you're not sure exactly what you might like. It gives you an opportunity to try out stuff that you probably might not have picked up on your own, or you might not have been able to afford to pick up, and it gives you an opportunity to try it and see if you like it. And also, because of the nature of the library, there are so many books there, so you'll probably find books that you had never heard of before and may not have even picked up if you hadn't had that opportunity. A really good example of what I'm talking about is actually this book. So this is a book that I found at my local library. If you can't see it, it's called Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows. I had never heard of this book before, and when I read the title I was like, oh my god, I need to read this. This was a 5-star read for me. I thought it was really funny. I thought it was incredibly well done. The title makes it sound like it's, you know, going to be a very funny story, and it is at times, but it's also a very important story about different cultures and how those different cultures, you know, we're talking about a kind of Sikh community in London and the kind of almost clash between someone who is very traditional and old school, whereas someone who grew up in London is still a part of the community but has that disconnect from them because they feel more British than they do Sikh. And there's also a mystery in this, which is fantastic. And for me really drew me in. But yeah, this is a book I had never heard of. I'd never heard of this author, and again, it's just one of those things where I've now started kind of reading through this author's catalogue, and I'm really enjoying it so far. Your local library will also be able to help you find books, so if you are not entirely sure where to start, you can always ask your local librarian. Hopefully they'll be able to kind of give you a few suggestions to point you in the right direction. In short, if you don't have a library card, go get one. Certainly within the UK where I am, if you just kind of search your town or your county and just click and add like library to it, it should be able to tell you, you know, where your nearest local one is and like how to get a library card and all that kind of stuff. In theory, that should also work for wherever you are in the world, but I know some areas may not have as much access to libraries as like we do here. Number 4, audiobooks and ebooks are your friend. Now I'm going to start by saying that audiobooks and ebooks are not for everyone. I know some people who just physically cannot listen to someone telling them a story. They much rather prefer to read. However, I would recommend that you try both of them out at least once. If you like reading a physical book, the only thing that's different about reading an ebook is that you don't physically turn pages. Other than that, it's, I think, sometimes a better experience, I'm just gonna say. Both are a very accessible way of reading. For audiobooks, if you have problems with your sight, or even if, you know, English isn't your first language and you kind of struggle to kind of understand what is written on the page, if you have dyslexia, audiobooks can be a really good way of getting that information in a way that's just going to be a little bit easier for you. I also find that just audiobooks are a great way to read whilst you're doing other things. If you are someone who is very busy, you have childcare responsibilities, you are working very long hours, and if you have like quite a long commute to work or school, audiobooks are a great way to kind of get that reading in during that time. I do a fair bit of travelling, both like my personal life and sometimes for work, but I get travel sick whilst I travel, so I really struggle to read a physical book whilst I'm on a train or a bus or anything like that. But I can listen whilst I'm travelling. So in those moments where I wouldn't be able to pick up a book and read, I can still get through a book in a way that doesn't make me feel absolutely awful. It is also a bit of a faux pas to be walking around like physically with your nose stuck in a book. So when I go for my like daily walks, it's nice to be able to pop in an audiobook rather than carry a physical book around and nearly get hit by a car, which, funny enough, is what happened when I was reading this book. Ebooks are also a great way to read. If you are someone who can read on buses and trains and things like that, ebooks give you a way to read without needing to bring a physical book with you. Instead, you can bring it on a phone or tablet. There are a bunch of kind of like e-readers that you can buy specifically for that, but you don't really need that. I use my iPad most of the time, but I also have stuff on my phone as well. I think a really good example of what I mean is this book, which is one of my favourite books of last year. So Priory of the Orange Tree. As you can tell, this is a chunky book. I believe it's like 800 and something pages. I got this instead as an ebook. This is my partner's copy because I ranted about it so much that he then bought his own. But yeah, so I have the ebook version of this. And I found that it was a lot easier to read it because, you know, when I'd be travelling, I could just bring my phone out, read a little bit, or I could take my iPad and, you know, I didn't have to carry something like this in my bag, which is very big. And I have noticed that if a book is big, I'm probably less likely to carry it around and less likely to take it to places and therefore less likely to read it. So yeah, it just gives you an opportunity to be able to read something that is maybe a little bit daunting in a much more accessible way. Also, we'll just add ebooks. You can change the font size, you can change the font usually as well. If you look at the text of a book and it's really small or the font just doesn't really work with you, you can just change that. It's so easy. I read like 6 ebooks this year so far, and only 1 physical book. So like, trust me, like ebooks, 2 thumbs up, audiobooks, 2 thumbs up. Like, don't get me wrong, I love physical books. That's why I do own like a lot of copies of books. But yeah, sometimes you just need something in a different format to be able to kind of take it in. Just adding a little point here that if libraries are your friend and audiobooks and ebooks are also your friend, your library's online resources are your best friend. So many libraries will have some form of an online or e-library. As a part of this online service, you can access ebooks and audiobooks and sometimes like things like magazines and newspapers, all as a part of your membership. I can't guarantee that everywhere it's completely free, but at least all of the ones I've seen here in the UK, that service is just included. You don't have to pay for it. One that I hear a lot, and you probably have heard about it or you will hear about it very soon, is Libby. I know particularly in the US a lot of libraries use that, but my local library uses BorrowBox, which works in a very similar way. Essentially, you have pretty much the entire library catalogue. You know, for me on BorrowBox, I have the choice of thousands of ebooks, thousands of audiobooks, and usually get very new releases. So I've had books on there that, you know, came out at the end of last month and I can read them now. And I am reading them now. So yeah, it works very similar to like a traditional library. You can borrow, you can reserve, you can read, all on this kind of platform. So if your library offers something like this, which again you can check by going off online, absolutely make the most of it. Next point, number 5, set yourself a routine. So you've got your books, you've got your genres, now we just need to read. It's always easy to be able to get into a habit when you set yourself time to actually do it. I personally find it best to set a little bit of time after work, like right when I finish work. I can pick up a book, I can relax, I can unwind after working all day, but I still have time before dinner and before I need to do anything else. If you are someone who commutes to work or school, that's something you can do. If you take public transport, obviously you'd be able to take a physical book or an ebook. If you are driving, you probably shouldn't be physically reading, but you can absolutely put on an audiobook and listen instead. If you are unsure exactly where to start and you want to make this a habit, I would recommend putting reading into an existing routine that you have. If you are someone who is trying to stop reaching for their phone first thing in the morning, well, instead put a book on your bedside table and reach for that instead. If you have an existing bedtime routine that kind of involves winding down, you can add reading into that. You know, that's something that I do. I tend to read about half an hour to an hour before I go to bed, so that I've got the like no screen time just before bed and all that kind of stuff. Whatever works for you is best, and it's fine if you don't have time to do it every single day. If you are really busy and the only time you get to read is on a weekend, well then, you know, set some hours where, you know, cool, this is reading time, and there you go. Number 6, some books aren't great, and that's okay. So you've picked up a book that seems completely you, and you start reading, and oh boy, sometimes books are bad. That's okay. Not every book will be a favourite. It's literally impossible. There will be books that you will pick up and you will realise, whether that be quickly or slowly, that it is just not for you. And it is okay to stop reading those books. You are not doing anything heroic by sacrificing yourself and forcing yourself to read that book. And honestly, if anything, it's just stopping you from reading books that you will like. It is totally fine if you want to finish every book that you pick up. I do get it. I really do. I will be honest, this book does not interest me at all. But I'm gonna read it. I don't want to, but I will. I have my own reasons for that. But yeah, stay tuned for that video. It's probably coming. But sometimes if a book is upsetting you or it's just making you mad, it's just not worth it. It's time to put it down. We all have a finite amount of time on this earth, so you shouldn't waste any of it doing something that isn't going to be adding value to your life. Unless you enjoy hate reading, in which case, feel free, go ahead. Number 7, start now, right now. I know this is going to be out way past the new year. I started the year with the flu, so it's not my fault. But there is no reason to wait for the perfect time in order to start. It doesn't matter if you want to start in January, if you want to start in July, if you want to start November 17th. You know, there is this idea that like when you're starting something new, you should wait for, you know, a natural beginning, whether that's the start of a month, especially the start of a year. But please don't let that stop you. If you want to read more, start reading today. Like, genuinely, I'm not just saying this. Go and pick up a book right now. Go pick up a book and read it. It could be this one if you want. The sooner you start, the sooner you'll be glad that you started. Does that make sense? You know what I mean. When I made the decision to read more, it was mid-November, I want to say. I did not wait until the new year. I just started reading. I picked up my first book, which was this one, and I finished it in January, so it was actually my first book of the year. But it, you know, this was a book that I wanted to read, so I read. Because, oh, it's not this one, it's this one. This is the next one I read. Because I started this not in a time where it was like, oh, now I'm doing this new thing. I just started it. It made it a lot easier for me to continue because it was just something that I was doing. It wasn't a, oh, I'm doing this because of the new year. So now when all of that, like, new year, like, madness goes away, you're kind of like, oh, I don't really want to do this anymore. Number 8, sorry, my hand's bad. Number 8, there is a community. Use it. We are so lucky to be living in this digital age. There are so many resources at your fingertips that will help you in your reading journey, whether it's by helping you find books, helping you find like-minded readers, or whatever. The concept of a book club has been around for probably, I think, centuries. And if you like the idea of being able to discuss a book with a bunch of friends, then absolutely go ahead and start a book club. There are other ways to kind of find like-minded friends and readers to kind of read with. You know, the idea of a silent book club, which is basically just you come together and everyone reads whatever they want, rather than, oh, we're all going to read this specific book. You know, I went to one last month and it was really fun, actually. I got to read quite a lot in this, like, dedicated time to read. But it isn't just kind of finding people like you to spend time with, but also, you know, if you are someone who is kind of struggling on finding what to read, you know, there are forums, there are tons of places where you can find book recommendations for either very specific things or very broad ideas. You know, if you post on r/books on Reddit, there will be tons of people who are there and willing to help you find a book that you love. And if reading is something that's just a little bit more personal, you don't really want to kind of share it with anyone, that's also fine. I personally use the Storygraph as a way to keep track of all of my reading and to kind of help plan what I'm going to be reading next. With the Storygraph, you have like an actual list. You have your like TBR, that is like a list that you can click on and you can scroll through it and you can find something within that. If you're in the mood for something that's adventurous or something that's just light-hearted, or something that is very emotional and because you want to cry, you can kind of filter by that and you can find books that you've already marked that you want to read from that. I will say that for me, being able to track my like reading stats and seeing how I was like improving or like not improving in certain areas really helped me, because I was able to kind of go, I read more books last month than I did this month, but I actually read more pages this month, so, you know, I might have read more last month, but maybe those were smaller books, or maybe they were mostly audiobooks, and now I've actually read a lot of pages and things like that. Yeah, I personally would recommend Storygraph. It's also owned by a Black woman, it's not owned by Amazon, so it's a win-win for me. I'm sure there are like tons of other suggestions that people can think of. If there's something that you think helped you in your reading journey, that I haven't mentioned, like feel free to pop that in the comments to let other people know. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this helped you. I'm kind of hoping to be making a few other books on kind of like bookish content. Did I say books? I did. I meant videos. Yeah, I like talking about books. I also, if you look back at some of my other videos, I enjoy talking about kind of like activism stuff, particularly racial justice. So if that interests you, do feel free to stick around and keep an eye out for my next video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll see you later. Bye! Do you love watching fantasy? Fantasy? Oh, ah, shit.